So how do I regulate rest intervals with athletes in a team setting? I mean, there's not a perfect situation for this, but what I like to do is pair the athletes in groups of four with a power rack. Then assuming you're doing a A1, A2 agonist, antagonist superset, or even just single station on a squat or a deadlift, for example, what happens is you have two athletes working on the A1, two athletes working on the B1, the A2, I mean. And then as one does the set, the other partner supports, coaches the athlete, they switch, and then the two group go to the A1 and the two people from A1 go to the A2. So this tends to like regulate the rest period like at 90 seconds, 120 seconds in between the A1 and A2, like pretty naturally. It's not going to be perfect, but it works fairly well. Then I also like to use a clock and give a time frame for the completion of each segment of the workout. Typically the A series, we use a 25-minute clock, the B series 15 minutes, and the C series a 10-minute clock. This way, like, they can pace themselves because they know they need to complete the sets in that time frame. So it's another way to kind of encourage the athletes to maintain pace as they're training through their training sessions. So a hockey player lagging acceleration, do I incorporate track days? No, like personally with hockey, I don't really like sprinting. I'd much rather spend focus the off season on structural balance, increase in strength, the use of power methods in the weight room. But the reason why I don't like sprints is the hockey player, he's not used at all to the forces and the demands of sprinting. He's used to skate, to glide on the ice. So the strides and the forces requirement are completely different. So I find that by putting the athlete on a track before the hockey season, the risk reward isn't great. I'd much rather them doing energy system work on the ice and be more specific as they get closer to the season than to have track work. So if they lack acceleration, I'll use acceleration type explosive method in the weight room to try to improve that, but not sprinting. The most impressive lift I've seen as a coach in my career, there's two of them that comes up to my mind, and they're not cool lifts, but it was just remarkable to see it live. The first one, it was a guard, NFL guard, and it's the phase one, like the first workout we're doing. And the guy I knew, like in college, he was known to be the strongest in his school and on and on. But anyways, big guy, like 6'4", 330. We were doing the standing leg curl. And then for those of you who have tried the Atlantis standing leg curl, the whole stack is super hard. But anyways, we're doing sets of 8 with the whole stack, and his reps were so forceful that the machine would lift every rep you were doing. So that to me was just crazy. The machine's lift, he's standing on it at 330, and he's doing the whole stack. The second lift that was super impressive to me was a baseball player. It was decline, easy bar, tricep extensions for sets of 6. He had 235 pounds on the bar, plus 20 pounds of chains per side. It was popping out 6 reps with that weight. That to me was just crazy. So long-term periodization for an athlete that's at the top of his weight class and already has low body fat, how do you train them long-term? I mean, honestly, there's not a wide range of things you can do in terms of variations of intensities. You're going to have to stay pretty high, like 85% of 1RM or higher. But the one thing I will say is you have to make sure that the volume is on the lower end of the spectrum, because if you're training at that high in intensity for a long time, it can get very, very draining, can be really hard on the joints as well. So you have to make sure that you're monitoring the total volume when you're training at these high intensities for that long a period of time. That being said, there would still be a few phases here and there that I would reduce the intensity, like go below 85%, mostly to deload the joints. But again, I would make sure the volume is really low so that the hypertrophy response from it is not too great. Okay, so that, it's a hard one to say, but I would do these hypertrophy low intensity phase far away from events and then focus mostly on relative strength work at low intensity, low frequency. What's my take on German volume training, how I incorporate it and when? I'm not a huge fan of this method. If I were to use it, it would be in year one with a new athlete, because it's not a very advanced method. Because we have to consider that a true German volume training, it's 10 sets of 10, but with a load of 60% of 1 RM. So that load is an entry-level load in order to gain strength and mass. Now, the advantage of the German volume training is that if you have a client that has technical difficulty with lifts, so let's say like his squat is a little funky, now that method allows you to do a lot of work, a lot of repetitions on the lift, so it's a good thing to try to improve technical weak points on certain lifts, but it is low intensity. It's only 60% of 1 RM, so with somebody advanced, you're not going to get a lot of results from it. Okay, now keep in mind, German volume training is not 10 by 10 per se. Okay, we're not talking about 10 sets of 10 at 74% of your 1 RM. It's 10 sets of 10 at 60% of your 1 RM. Okay, so this is why this would be an accumulation phase in the early stages of training of a new athlete. Is there a progression I use for the B series, which are the specialty squats of a squat 2 session? It depends. With an athlete, it would be very different than a general population, for example. But general pop, one thing I like to do is earlier on, I tend to focus on specialty squat variations that allows you a full range of motion at the knee joint and kind of teaches you to stay a little bit more upright. I find that by doing that, you tend to improve the looks, the technical look of the back squat as your primary exercise. So I might start with barbell hack squat, okay, which is like an easier form of a upright squat position where you're holding the weight behind you. So the center of mass of the load is lower, but it teaches you form. It teaches you to push the knees forward. It forces you to stay more upright. Then you progress from barbell hack squat to a cyclist squat. So cyclist squat is the barbell in the back, but now the heels are elevated 30 degrees and the feet are narrower, like the 4 to 6 inches, 10 to 15 centimeters, basically the width of the pedals of a bicycle. And then this is a lot of quad involvement. You have to stay upright. You're really pushing the knees forward. Then you follow this. So phase 3, I would use a quad squat. So same thing, you're still elevated 30 degrees, but now your feet are more your normal squat width. And then from then you can move on to a heel elevated back squat with a safety bar. Then at that point, I feel now you can start either introducing special methods, so like eccentric methods or isometric methods, or I like at this point to start using the pins in the power rack and do the pin touch technique at certain levels. So you start by overloading the midpoint, then the top quarter, then top third, and top quarter. So this way you're building up your ability to withstand load on your back. So I like doing this. So I progress from long range to short range. Why I use animal walks? Well, whenever I do conditioning, I use a 4 exercise circuit, a lot of modified strongman, some sled stuff, prowler, the tank, and on and on. But I like to add animal walks because what I like about it is, assuming like you're paying attention to coaching the movement, you can't. First of all, it's fun for the clients. Like you're moving in different planes of motions at different velocities, but it allows you. It forces you to brace and stabilize your body while being out of breath, which for your weekend warriors who play a lot of sports and tends to have like aches and pains and little tweaks. Well, oftentimes this happens when you're out of breath, tired, fatigued. You're playing a sport. You're moving in a plane or an angle that you're not used to, and then you're not bracing properly. So if you get better at bracing and stabilizing things while moving in many different planes of motion and being out of breath, I think it carries a lot of benefits to your conditioning session. But on top of it, it's one more type of movement you're introducing to the whole conditioning circuit. So training considerations for 3 to 4 times a week in season training. This is hard for me to answer because the sport is not specified. So if it's American football, 1 game a week, but a very intense, hard on the body sport, I personally would not train 3 or 4 times a week. But if we're talking, I have some baseball players, they play every day. They're used to the grind of the sport. So at that point, you could train 4 times a week if you wanted to. But I would probably use more of a split routine to disperse the training volume through a wider range of exercises, through a little bit more isolation work as well. Because if you start doing a lot of compound work, like 4 times a week in season, you might affect performance for the athlete. So I'd use a split routine. Make sure I keep the volume of the session low. I don't like to have training sessions that are above 40 minutes in season. And I would probably, if I have all that time to train, I would probably add a lot more remedial type exercises on muscles that might be neglected by the sport, or muscles that by maintaining the strength level you will prevent some injuries. Again, for example, in baseball, ulnar flexion, radial flexion, supination, pronations are things that I would add to the training during the season to maintain wrist and elbow health for these guys. So these are things you have to consider, but without knowing the sport, it's a little bit hard for me to be very specific. In my opinion, the most important factor to consider for hypertrophy when an advanced lifter is load. I mean, we know that volume is an important parameter when it comes to hypertrophy, but I think that the more advanced you are, the more the load perspective becomes quite important. So for me, I would introduce more high intensity work to the training. I would introduce more aggressive methods like eccentric methods or isometric methods to try to increase motor unit recruitment, to try to tap into a wider pool of motor units, to create more trauma, to dig in the satellite cell pool, to aid with hypertrophy in general. Because the longer the training age, the more specialized you need to be with special methods to further progress with hypertrophy. At first, you can use a lot of volume-based methods, but you're going to realize at one point you're plateauing, and going more on the strength side of things might really help break hypertrophy plateaus. A 3 time a week split for strength training. Honestly, for me, 3 times a week, I like to use a upper-lower split. So week 1, you do upper, lower, bring back the upper again on Friday. Week 2, you start with lower, upper, lower, and on and on. So you just have 2 different workouts that just repeats 3 times within the week, and you just alternate for the duration of the mesocycle. That to me is what works best for the majority of people. Now another alternative that I used in the past with like older executive clients that have higher stress level, that the recovery it's a little bit more challenge because of either age or work or stress. I like to simply use a chest and back on Monday, lower body on Wednesday, arms and shoulder on Friday. And that allows them like 7 days of recovery before you're hitting the same exercises. For that clientele, it works well, but for a younger population, I don't think there's enough stress, there's enough stimulus to make this very effective.